This is B2B Enablement, a Klyck.io podcast created to inspire sales and marketing leaders navigating digital transformation. I'm your host, Dave Carr, and on this show, we'll share actionable insights to build winning digital strategies and deliver better sales results with your customers. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of B2B Enablement. Today, we're going to take a very different approach than we have with previous episodes. What I'm going to do is actually include an excerpt from a webinar that we recently hosted on how to get started with sales enablement. And I was really fortunate to be the moderator of a really good discussion between Paul Tkach, who is the Director of Business Development at Klyck.io, and Rebecca Sperry, who is the Director of Customer Success at Klyck, and really dug deep into what it takes to get started with sales enablement. And in this webinar, we shared a lot of really interesting ideas about how to get started with building your team, how to set up metrics and KPIs to track, how to handle your content management, and then ultimately how to build the team and the strategy that ultimately would launch a successful sales enablement strategy within your company. So I hope that you enjoy this new format. I'm going to include and cut directly to the beginning of the webinar as soon as I wrap up. And if you want to hear the webinar in its entirety or watch to see the slides, I am going to put a link in the show notes to an on-demand version video of that webinar, as well as links to all of the resources that we mentioned in the webinar. There's some great stuff in there, including a sales enablement checklist, a sales enablement blueprint, and many other resources to help you get started with your sales enablement journey. So with that, I'm going to cut right to the start of the webinar, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks so much, Dave. I appreciate that. And for everyone who's just joining and everyone who doesn't know me, my name's Paul. I'm the Director of Business Development here at Klyck. So over the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity of working very closely with a lot of new customers on their sales enablement projects and journeys. And over the next remainder of the webinar here, Rebecca and I are going to talk about the top 5 things that you should do when getting started with sales enablement. And so we'll break these down and go into these in detail. Just pulling up this list here and talking about the agenda. First, we're going to talk about getting started with your team. So who owns your team and how do you build that team? How do we set ourselves up for success with a sales enablement project by having the right people on the right team in the right positions? Next, we're going to talk about setting clear requirements and goals. So when you set out for your project, there's obviously something in mind you're trying to achieve, a challenge you're trying to overcome. So we're going to talk about how you really set those goals up and those requirements to achieve them. Third, we're going to talk about defining your key metrics. So when you do set these goals and requirements in place for your journey, you're going to want to measure them and make sure that they're attainable and you're staying on track and working towards them. So we'll help you identify what metrics you should set and some good KPIs while you do work through your project. For 4 and 5, Rebecca is going to go over content creation and organization, and then talk a little bit about how to actually implement your sales enablement solution and tool. So we're going to try and pull in some real life use cases from companies that we've worked with and just share some insight from the teams that we've worked with. As we'd mentioned before, if you do have any questions, you can either just click the raise hand button and we will get around to you, or if you want to type it into the chat, we will get to your question as well. So first and foremost, starting with building your team. I think that building your team is one of the most overlooked aspects of getting started with a project. When it comes to sales enablement solutions or even tools in general, when it comes to implementing them into your tool stack, a lot of teams think that it's just plug and play and something that you can toss in and hope that it works immediately. But when it comes down to a sales enablement project and really accomplishing some of the goals that you have set out, it's imperative that you get the right people in the right place to help push that project forward. And so when we're talking about building your team, the first thing that you need to do is appoint the right champion internally. So you're going to want someone who has an understanding of both sides of your business and has an understanding of how your business works and operates. And what I mean by understands how your business operates is someone who has cross-functional expertise, somebody who has the ability to understand what's happening on that sales side and what's also happening on that marketing side. It's important because when we put together a sales enablement project, there are multiple stakeholders involved. You typically have receivers and supporters. So who's actually supporting the solution and the tool? You have people who put content into it and organize it. But then you have people who receive a lot of the benefit and the value from it immediately, like the sales team who goes out and uses it. So when we are choosing someone, we want to make sure that there is someone on your team who does have insight into both sides of the business, so they can understand the needs from sales and they can understand the needs from marketing as well. One of the other things too is we always typically find the person who is leading the project doesn't have a specific role and is entirely focused on this project. I mean, we were just chatting a couple of minutes ago. Rebecca brought up a really good point. The question we were discussing was whether or not you need to hire someone specifically to lead your sales enablement team. And the straight answer was you don't. You can have somebody who works at your company and then takes on the project as a separate side role. And we've seen this work very, very effectively. So you don't need to hire somebody separate. You just need someone with the knowledge of the business and can work together with another team. So when I talk about receivers and supporters as well, this is something that you need to take into consideration once you're getting your team started. So you want to make sure that you take all aspects into consideration when you're putting your project together. So as I mentioned before, you'll have your receivers and your supporters. So the receivers are going to be people who need to use that product on a daily basis. So maybe sales reps who come in to access content for meetings or content to share with prospects. You need to take that into consideration, right? You need someone who has visibility into what they do so they can understand the content they need, how it needs to be organized, maybe best recommendations for those people. But then you also need someone to have visibility into the marketing side too, to get a better understanding of how everything's functioning there and making sure that that content is staying organized and produced properly. So when we're defining respective roles, you're going to want to make sure that you really understand the project that you've set out to create and initiate. So when you are setting up your team, make sure that you do have people who are responsible for various aspects of the project. For example, when we work with a couple of my customers right now, what we typically see is somebody who champions the project. So somebody who leads it and facilitates most of the project. But then you also have supporters, as I had mentioned. So maybe somebody on the marketing side who is doing your content revisions, who is ensuring that the content in your solution or your platform is up to date and working properly. So really, we don't see massive committees coming together to get sales enablement projects moving, but it is much more than just a simple plug and play system, right? If you get a sales enablement project set up, you need to make sure that it is being maintained going forward, and it does have proper maintenance for everything involves content and process. So moving forward, I think that we'll just kind of take a 60-second here. If anybody's got some questions, we can go ahead and answer those.
Yeah, Paul, your question or your comment rather about, do you need to hire someone in a specific sales enablement role? We hear that a lot, and I think you're spot on. You don't have to put someone in a dedicated role, especially as you're getting started. But I guess one, quick question I have for Rebecca, because I know that you're working with our customers constantly from a customer success standpoint. How have you seen, some of our most successful clients go through that process? And are they using someone dedicated, or are they using a combination of people in other roles to help lead?
Yeah, for sure. Quite often it is going to be somebody that has the time and the tools to really guide the project. From our biggest customers, they don't have one dedicated individual where their whole job, all 40 hours of the week, is focused solely on sales enablement. They often do wear multiple hats, and sales enablement will be 1/3 of that hat. And we find this is really successful because then they have the means and they have the information from the other sides of the business and the other resources to really help them succeed as a sales enablement manager for them.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And I guess one thing I would just add on to that, I've spent a lot of time in my career in sales and also in marketing. I think that when you're building that team, thinking intentionally about getting individuals that can bridge the gap so that, have respect and rapport with marketing and with sales or vice versa is really important, because, the whole goal of the sales enablement solution is to help drive that better connectivity. So I think that, one very common piece of advice that we give out is, make sure those individuals have good cross-functional relationships.
Yeah. And I think if we look at the projects that have been extremely successful, we see there's been input from various teams, right? It's not just two people at the top organizing the project and dictating it for everybody. We've seen, some really good examples of sales reps having very, very valuable input on the content that they want to use, how they go out and sell on a daily basis. And that helps with aligning the project and the tool, right? So really, when it comes down to that cross functionality, making sure you do have input from various teams and aspects.
Yeah,
a good manager will always rely on the other members of their team to help them get what they need to be done.
Yeah. Agreed. Great. Okay, great. So the next point we wanted to talk about here was just setting clear goals and requirements. So I think that putting the team together is one of the most overlooked aspects of getting started, as everyone thinks it's plug and play. Once you've kind of got that out of the way, what we really talk about next is setting your clear goals and requirements. And so this comes down to really assessing your current state and getting an understanding of where you're at right now. And in a way, this can hurt because you do have to be very honest with yourself and make sure that you are looking at your company's tribulations and where you're at right now, right? The more honest you are with yourself and where we're at on certain metrics, or maybe we're not doing this enough, or we're not sharing enough content, or we're not closing enough deals, the more honest you are with it, with that state and being open with yourself, the better goals you'll be able to set that are actually attainable and achievable. So we recommend doing that is just take a look at yourself and your company and start there, right? Start with what data you have, what metrics you've collected. And then from there, we really recommend establishing simple but clear goals. So clear objectives that you're trying to achieve. And these typically pair with a challenge, right? So when you have looked at where you're currently sitting and maybe you've identified some certain challenges, it's pretty easy to pair your goals with those challenges. So we always see a one-to-one, right? So you identify a challenge, then find out what goal might pair with that. So for example, if our team is maybe not sharing enough content or using enough content, we can see that the current metric we have is showing we aren't sending enough emails with content. It's really easy to set a goal, a one-to-one goal, to check every month. Are we actually using content in our deals and our opportunities? Are we actually engaging our prospect with content? And so that's what we recommend is establish simple but clear goals. You don't have to come up with a list of 10 goals that you want to achieve, but this typically comes down to 2 or 3 reasonable goals that you should set up. We talked about this in the last one, but making sure that you collect your input from stakeholders, right? So it's not just going to be the leadership team who wants to set these goals, but it's also going to be the sales team, right? What are the sales team actually having challenges with? You'll need insight into that as well, so you can help establish these goals and uncover what needs to be fixed and what needs to be improved. So yeah, we recommend by starting 2 or 3 reasonable goals. And like I said, that really pairs from the challenges that you uncover your team facing. What we recommend as well is creating a blueprint. So we actually have a blueprint as a piece of Klyck content that we're happy to share out afterwards. But what we do is with every team that comes and works with Klyck, we set up a blueprint to help get a better understanding of what it is they're trying to achieve. So we pull this up, and it's basically a small little matrix that helps us define the goals they have, some of the KPIs involved in measuring those goals. And it's really just a one-page of getting set up and ready to define what we want to achieve. And if anyone's interested afterwards, we're happy to share that out as well. If you just leave maybe a comment, if you put a 1 in the chat or something, we can definitely share that blueprint out with you as well. And the reason why we do this is it's really easy to get caught up in some of the small details with the project. And having the blueprint in place really allows you to go back to the main goals that you've set up and keep focusing on those goals. Like we said, it's pretty easy to lose sight of the bigger picture and focus on maybe smaller achievable goals. But really what we want to do is focus on the main challenges that we've set out to achieve. So setting your goals will also help keep your team motivated and engaged. And so this is something we've seen in the past before. If you don't have a clear finish line of where you want to go and where you want to end up, a lot of your team is not going to be interested in moving forward with the project either. So really, if you set goals and you get everyone involved and you have input from your sales team, your marketing team, maybe your operations and analytics team, everybody's a little bit more invested, and it really, really helps move that project forward in a better way. Last but not least, we recommend setting up and establishing a user requirements guide. This is also something that we're happy to share out as well. So we can get this out to you as well. What it is basically I mean, I couldn't explain it more than user requirements guide, but it's a way for you to define what it is that your users need. So really taking a look at different systems, the features involved with those systems. Do we need our platform in multiple languages? Do we need different types of search capabilities? Do we need features X, Y, and Z? So establishing a user requirements guide really gives you an idea of, hey, this is everything that we need for our project. We now need to go find a solution that matches this perfectly. And so, like I said, we're happy to share that out as well. If you just write in the chat, user requirements guide, we'll take your name down and happy to share that out afterwards as well. Take a quick break here. If we do have any other questions around aligning some of your goals and objectives, Dave and Becca, I'm not sure if you guys had any input as well there, if there's anything you wanted to chime in with.
Yeah. So a couple of things came in here on chat and also Q&A. So a couple folks have asked for the blueprint. So yes, we will. What we'll do, we're going to send out a summary email to everybody that's joined, and we'll include a link to the blueprint. We'll include a link to the user requirement guide, as well as an on-demand link to this webinar. So we will load you up with good information. If there's anything else that you guys would like to dive in further, you can just simply reply to that email or use the contact us form on our website. We'd be happy to get in touch with you and talk about that one-on-one. So that's first. Secondly, we had a question come in Q&A, Paul, right as you were talking about, how you get started. And the question was around is there a process or a guidebook that you use to do that? I think you already spoke a little bit to that in terms of the blueprint, but maybe either you or Becca go maybe a little deeper around how you've seen, not only just saying, hey, I've got a guidebook or a roadmap, but how you really begin to take that and start putting meat on the bones. And if you've got any best practices from other clients.
Yeah, I can start. And then Becca, if you want to chime in, you can help there too. I think when it comes to starting a project, everybody has something in mind. I mean, you wouldn't be setting out on a sales enablement journey or looking to take on a platform if you didn't have something in your mind lingering that you wanted to fix. So I think that there's always something there that you can improve and fix upon. And that's where we typically see teams start. I mean, when we get into a conversation or we start engaging with one of our partners, there's typically a challenge that arises that they need to solve. And we work backwards from there. So really it's establishing the main challenges. What is that roadblock or that barrier that's really preventing your team from getting up to the next level, right? And I don't think we mentioned any goals or requirements here, but I mean, if we talk about typical goals and requirements that we see, better sales and marketing alignment is a big one. Determining sales training needs, right? Setting up a good training process is something we hear as well. More insight into customer engagement around content. So these are typical goals and requirements we hear, or we'll hear the opposite, like a challenge, like we're not getting enough opportunities into the pipeline. And then from there, we'll work back and say, okay, well, how are you engaging your prospects? How are you finding your content? Is your team sharing content? And then that's kind of how we take a step back. Becca, I'm not sure if you had any other input there from what you've seen.
Yeah, for sure. I have a really excellent real life example of this. One of our customers came to us, and their biggest problem, as Dave mentioned, was one of the earliest statistics about not being able to find content and then not using it. So what we were able to do was we focused and aligned the goal of being able to improve that searching. So what we did is we were taking records of all the search results of what the end users, the sales individuals, were entering into the application. And then we were able to work backwards for all the results that came back with 0. We started tagging content to those search terms so that we knew what they were looking for. We could see, hey, nothing's coming back. There should definitely be 4 or 5 files available to them to match that search term, and therefore just aligning that process. And that was just a clear and cut goal that was really achievable.
Yeah, that's a great example, Becca. Great example, and a great way to show how using data, again, to help drive that direction and help guide, your activities. All right, great. Well, Paul, that's all we had for the chat.
Well, I think that's a good segue into the next part about data and collecting data and why it's so important that you collect your data and metrics. So, jumping into the next section here, we want to talk about defining key metrics. So you've now found your team, you've set up your team for success. You've got your clear goals and requirements set up. Now it's a matter of actually measuring how you're going to achieve those goals. So staying on top of that and ensuring that you measure your progress going forward. And you'll be surprised that a lot of teams that don't do this and then don't get an understanding of where they're at 6 months, 8 months into the project. It's absolutely imperative that you collect key metrics on your goals and requirements. And any good sales enablement platform will have analytics provided for you. So you should have reporting and analytics that you can collect. And so as we jump into this and talk a little bit about defining key metrics, this really comes down to just pairing them with the clear goals and requirements you've set up so that we can get an understanding of whether or not we're moving in the right direction. So it comes down to choosing clear KPIs that help measure those goals and objectives. And so when we talk about measuring these goals and objectives, some examples of metrics would be maybe around utilization. So the first thing you're going to want to see is maybe our team actually using the solution and the platform, right? So you could start measuring KPIs, number of sales logins, right? How many people on the sales team are logging in and how frequently. Another thing you could do with measurements on KPIs is maybe the number of presentations that are created each week. So you can get an understanding of how often your sales team is actually putting together content to get ready for a meeting. Another thing is maybe number of content by shares. So this helps give you a better understanding of how often your team is sharing content out with customers. And if we go even deeper on that, you can then get analytics into the content effectiveness and how it's built up and worked for an opportunity. So has your sales team engaged with an opportunity and shared 20 pieces of content or 5 pieces of content? And further down the road, you'll be able to see the success of opportunities and how much content it took to really get that over the finish line. And that's where you really want to end up when you set these KPIs is having data that helps you make better decisions, right? Not only on achieving your goals, but insights on things that can help you make better decisions to increase your revenue or the efficiency of your team. So that's really important, is that you just define basic but important metrics, right? And you don't need 20 or 30 KPIs. We recommend just keeping it very, very simple. For example, a lot of the dashboards that we keep within our Klyck system for a lot of our customers and partners are around the content effectiveness and the user utilization. So we typically see dashboards and KPIs around content, right? How often is content being used? Something I always say, and Rebecca and Dave, this probably, you guys hear me say this day in, day out, but I mean, you can make the best piece of content in the world, but if nobody uses it, then what good is it, right? And so I think that's so important, because the marketing team can spend so much time building this great content, and it can be very effective, but if it never sees the daylight, then it never has the chance to be effective, right? And so getting back to that point, metrics around content effectiveness and utilization. Is it actually being used? Is it being shared out? All the way to dashboards, we see dashboards and metrics around how many users are logging in, how frequently, what devices are they logging in from? And so I think, Rebecca, maybe you have a couple more metrics that we've collected or you've seen on the customer success side, but I think that's pretty accurate on the dashboards.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the biggest thing too is, in terms of the content effectiveness, is making sure that information is available to the end users as well. So from a marketing perspective, you're getting insights into what your sales users are doing with the content. And then from a sales user perspective, you're getting information about what your customers and prospects are doing with that content once it's actually left the application in an email. And that's that vital piece of metrics, because that's really going to help you guide and tailor your follow-ups after that based upon what they've done with what you've sent out to them.
It's a very good point. Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think a lot of people, when they look at sales enablement, they obviously have an understanding that you can collect analytics on your own content, but a good sales enablement platform will also help you understand the engagement from your customers or your prospects. So that's something that with Klyck that we do is we help the sales team get an understanding of who's actually engaging with your content. So when you share out a brochure or a presentation, you'll actually be able to see how often it was opened and how many times and for how long. And so that insight is valuable for the sales team. So I think that, yeah, when we talk about metrics, I think that it's valuable all around the board, right? Valuable for sales who's interacting and engaging with prospects on a daily basis. But then metrics are just as important for your marketing team who's fueling your sales team with that content, right? So extremely important.
Yeah. For instance, you'll see pieces of content. For instance, a video might be opened by a sales rep once because they just had to watch it to know what it was. And then it's been opened in shares 50 times. So you really see the value as it moves through that content lifecycle as well.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's in my opinion, I think that the data piece of a good sales enablement platform is really the most important. And I'd say that too. I'm a data nerd. I love looking at data and looking at insights from that data, but you can really begin to see stories emerge when you're looking at that once you're doing it at scale. And from a marketing perspective, when you're looking at that at a macro level, I mean, what a great way to understand KPIs. Your return on investment, ROI, on your marketing content and how that's being used. I mean, I can tell you, I've run marketing for several companies now. One of the biggest challenges is always thinking, okay, we're investing all this time and effort and dollars into creating content. What return do we get on that from the sales side? It's very easy to track the inbound or the early stage side, but not so much from where it performs in the sales cycle. So that's interesting. One quick question we had come in around, so KPIs are related to change management. And it's a great question because I hear this personally a lot as well. Change management is such a big part of implementing a sales enablement solution. So how can KPIs and metrics help you keep that on track? Thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that with change management, and we've seen this happen multiple times where somebody has to leave for whatever the reason is, right? Going to a new company, maybe on mat leave or maybe whatever it might be. There's a reason why somebody would step out of the position. And we've seen it happen. So when it comes down to change management and how you ensure you're successful and that project is scalable and repeatable is really having these metrics set up clearly, right? So if you have metrics that are defined, it holds the project accountable and it holds the people responsible for everything that's been done. And for the next person who comes in and has to fill the shoes of that role, they now have full insight into everything that's going on. And like you said, Dave, as being a data nerd there, that's what you need, right? You have an understanding of the project, what's happened, how far we've gone, where we've improved, where we're lacking. And that type of insight really gets the person started on the right foot, right? So if somebody has to fill in the shoes and they don't have an understanding of what's taken place or where we're at or what the metrics are right now, it's much more difficult for them to take that next step forward and succeed with the project because they are pretty much starting from ground zero and don't have knowledge of what's happened so far. So metrics are absolutely vital, just for measuring where you've been from the start, right? It can be anything from content effectiveness to utilization, right? So very important that you define those metrics and you keep them in a centralized spot where someone else can step in and take them over and look at them.
Yeah. And just from the change management perspective of implementing something different and getting people to adopt it, I think the reason it's important to have those KPIs defined clearly up front is to facilitate that good communication. And so going back to our earlier point about who should you put in that role or who needs to be champions, having somebody that can have a seat at the executive table, bridge the gap between sales and marketing, and understand how to look at what goals were defined relative to the performance based on those KPIs is very important because that allows you to have data-driven conversations, not emotional conversations or perceptions. And so I think that it's extremely important to make sure that that's clear and that everyone who's involved in the project is going to be looking at those from an accountability standpoint. So yeah, well, that's all the questions we had there, Paul. So we can
couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Rolling.
I think there's I want to talk about the CRM. I think that this is so important. And we've seen over the past year and a half, especially with COVID come into place, we've seen multiple teams reset their CRM project or implement a new CRM. And this is something that's so important when it comes to your sales enablement project. Having a CRM and having a well-utilized CRM can really influence and help the succession of your project and help it succeed. And so what we mean by that is in the ability to connect your CRM with your sales enablement platform, you're really able to get a better understanding of opportunity metrics and deal influence. And so as I was mentioning a couple points before, by actually connecting the data, your CRM to Klyck or a sales enablement platform, you get time savings because your team can now work directly within their CRM. They can do everything that they're doing in their sales enablement platform natively inside of Salesforce or SAP or wherever you're using it. The second thing is the data, right? So now when your team is sharing out content or engaging with opportunities, you're collecting data on that content effectiveness and how it's working with those opportunities. So for leaders and leaders on the business side, they now have insight into how content is working for opportunities and how the opportunities are being engaged. And so as we were discussing before, you can really at the end take a look and see how much content has been used at a specific opportunity and how effective that has been, right? And so we think that the CRM is just extremely important to set up. It just kind of creates a holistic organization of the project, right? So, I mean, your team can really get a good understanding of how to use it from both the Klyck side or the CRM side. Doesn't matter; they'll have access from wherever they are. So, I think that's just something that's very important that the CRM needs to be set up properly. And Rebecca and Dave, I don't know if you guys have any points about that on the reporting side of things, but the more we see teams connect their CRM, the more they're able to get insight into how that content has really influenced opportunities or deals. I think the recommendation of content is probably another thing we should talk about.
Well, and to, a modern sales team, I mean, you're living and breathing in CRM, right? I mean, CRM and Microsoft Outlook are probably the two places your sales team are spending the most time. So having systems implemented and integrated with those is critical. To me, the biggest, most vital piece of if you really want to take your sales enablement to the next level is having that connectivity. And Salesforce.com is a leader, right? So, I mean, having an integration, if you're using Salesforce, having something that will integrate natively is important. And then again, Microsoft Outlook, that's another big piece of the puzzle. And yes, it is about suggestive content. Yes, it is about data. Yes, it's about all those things. But for your sales team, it's about one throat to choke, right? One place to go. And you're not having to go to 15 different systems to get your job done. It's easily integrated in your daily workflow. So that's at least my perspective on CRM and why it's so important.
And most teams will have an integration with CRM set up natively. So you should be able to connect everything off the start and begin using it from your CRM. But that's the most important thing, right? We had a use case recently where a team wanted to only use their CRM when engaging with Klyck. So the integration with their CRM really allows them to work on opportunities, log everything in Salesforce, and not have to worry about opening up any other windows, right?
Right.
So extremely important that you have the ability to work out of your CRM as well. The other thing that the last point here I'll make is recommended content. So when you do connect your CRM, especially with Klyck, we have a feature where you can recommend content for certain opportunities. So what we'll actually do is take that opportunity into consideration, maybe what industry it's in, and a couple of other criteria, and we'll actually recommend the most used or the best content for that specific opportunity. And this is, we get this a lot on following the process and really understanding how we can provide our team with a better process. That's a great way of doing it too, recommending content at opportunities. I think that's about it for defining key metrics, right? So just setting clear objectives and goals that align with, setting clear metrics that align with your objectives and goals. And then the connection to CRM is a very, very important part that we see teams doing these days. Any questions? I think we already had some come through. So
yeah, no questions as of right now, Paul.
Okay, great. So I'll let Rebecca jump into 4 and 5 here and talk a little bit more about content creation and organization.
Perfect. Yeah. So content creation and organization is going to be step 4 in the process. It's a very important one because this is going to be the foundation for the success of your sales enablement tool. So everything that you do will be very dependent on how well your content is organized and how well it's created inside of that system. So to start the process, the first thing you're going to want to do is to gather your content together. Different sales enablement tools will have different options for how you can sort or arrange your content. From us, we find the best practice is to always organize your content in the most efficient way, which is grouping it around its kind of base form. So for instance, this would be something like brochures or videos or spec sheets. This is going to be something that everybody is really easily able to identify. So you don't have to be a expert at your company to know that a video is a video. This will also help, especially if you have distributors or third parties using your application as well for sales enablement, because they'll be able to clearly tell what's a brochure and what's a video. So you're not grouping them in categories based around certain products or anything like that, because that can get very messy and you can have drop downs inside of drop downs. By keeping all of your content in sort of a flat structure with these categories, it really helps you understand what you have as well. Because for instance, you could say, I'm starting product X. I need marketing materials. I need a brochure. I need a graphic, a spec sheet, a video. And therefore you can see, do I have this information for this product that will help it sell better? And as you start to use your tool, and going back to what we talked about with the metrics, you'll find out which of these marketing content types is the most valuable. So perhaps you'll determine that you do need these 4 pieces of content for every single product, but perhaps there's 4 or 5 that aren't really necessary. Like, for instance, you might not need a white paper about every single product. That might not be super valuable because the usage just isn't there to support that continued marketing spend on that sort of resources. But yeah, so making them all universally recognizable for all of your users is really great. And so then going into that, you also want to aggregate and identify the sales and marketing content that you want your teams to use. So based upon what we talked about with the metrics, finding out what they're actually using in the day-to-day will help you guide your continued content lifecycle. So you can decide which pieces of content are valuable and worth the time and investment, which ones aren't. And as we talked about with the customers we had where they were actually seeing 0 search results, you want to make your content available for those people to see it when they're looking for it. So if you know you have something that's of value to them, you want to push it out to them. So some different sales enablement tools will have things like notifications where you can notify users about new content that's being added to an application or anything like that. You can have news feeds or dashboards that tell people about new content that's being in there. So really making sure that what they want to use and what you want them to use is at the very forefront. In terms of this, we also want to strive to have a complete content library. So one of the biggest benefits of any sales enablement tool is making it like a one-stop shop. You don't want to have them go to Dropbox and then go to Google Drive and then go wherever else to find all of that content. Putting everything and having it all organized in one central system is going to be the biggest benefit you can have. Nobody wants to go searching 10 different spots. If everything's just where it should be in this one system, that's the real winner right there. So making sure that it's organized from the get-go is very important. So in terms of understanding how your content is going to be structured and how it's going to be organized, one of the ways that we see as a best practice of doing this is to align it with your customer's buyer's journey. So the best sales enablement tools will have different tools you can use, such as filters or tags. And for filters, they would be additional sets that you can put on top of the entire library to really narrow it down to a specific instance that you're looking for. So for instance, if you're aligning it to your buyer's journey, you could suggest different pieces of content that are going to be really valuable during the awareness stage versus consideration or the decision stage. So for instance, if they're just getting started, they might want a light overview video. But then once you get down to the actual decision, they're going to want those spec sheets. They're going to need to know A, B, and C about this product, exactly how much it's going to cost them, additional support packages, anything like that. So really laying it all out there for your sales reps and your end users of saying, hey, if you're going here and you're talking to them about this, and this goes into what Paul is talking about too with the CRM connection, where you can have different stages laid out in your CRM opportunity. And saying, if you're at the beginning stages, this is the content we think you should be using. And then at the end stage, here's the best content that we've seen success with before for closers, and really laying it all out there for them. So it takes the guesswork out of it, and it really delivers it to them on a golden platter so they know exactly what they should be using and how it all works. And in regards to the tags as well, we will often recommend that you tag stuff based upon the industry that it should be recommended for. The language of the file, sales enablement tools, the best ones will always be multi-language. The sales stages we mentioned, as well as the product. And then a really key one is going to be the function or the application of the product that you're actually representing. So is this going to be used by people in a factory, or is it going to be used by people at the end stage of a sales cycle? Determining what that is and putting those tags on the content is going to be the most helpful thing, especially as people are spread around the globe. You can really narrow it down and give it to them exactly how they should be having it presented. And then additionally going into that, the tags and the filters will always help with the searching, because that's what the sales rep's going to do. They may not want to click 4 different filters. They are just going to go straight to that search bar and they're going to type in what they want to see. If they don't see anything, then that's when you as a sales enablement manager go back in and reapply those filters and tags. So what you want to show them is actually appearing for them there.
Yeah. And a quick question we had come in on that as well, Becca. From the standpoint of loading content and getting everything categorized, the question was, how long does the process usually take to load that content and to categorize? And this is a great one. We hear this all the time. But how would you respond to that? And then what tips and advice would you give others?
Yeah, of course. I would say that it always depends on the exact number of files that you have. It's definitely a scaling slide. So if you're starting off with 5 pieces of content, but you need to set up all your categories and filters, that's going to be the majority of the upfront work. Then after that, just adding new content and tagging it to the existing sets of filters and tags that you have in place, it's going to be a lot easier. So we could say it would take 5 hours to do 100 pieces of content and then just scale up from there as you keep growing your library. But the key thing to remember is that the content library is never finished. Marketing's work's never done in terms of creating new content. Your job's never done in terms of analyzing how that content is working. So you want to make sure that it's not all in the upfront cost of time and effort. It's a continuous project that will move and adapt as you get used to what you're doing and as you learn what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, great insight. And that was the only question we had at the end of this segment.
I think another one that I hear quite a bit, which might just be very valuable to mention is, what content should I start with in my sales enablement solution, right? Yeah. Where do I start?
Yeah. So as I was talking about in terms of having like a complete library, the best starting point is to do everything around, say, for instance, a certain industry or a certain product. So you want to make sure every piece of content for that one product is in the application and just roll it out in stages like that. So it'd be like product X, everything's done. Everything's in the sales enablement tool. Then you move on to product Y, put everything in there. Because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want people to be looking for stuff and then it's missing. Unless it actually is missing and marketing hasn't made it, then that's when you use those feedback cycles to actually respond. But if it's available somewhere, it should all be pushed into it in one big stage, as I would say.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
We see that quite often.
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
Cool. And then we get to the hard part, which is actually implementing your sales enablement tool. So this is going to be the last step in our 5-step process. So there's always a variety of sales enablement tools out there. They all have their own unique features and enhancements that some are tailored to certain industries, some are more general usage. The best thing that you're going to want to do is find the sales enablement tool that really fits your needs. So if you've gone through the whole process already in steps 1 and 2, you should be determining what those needs are. And therefore, you should basically have like a checklist of everything that you're looking for from a system. And then you just go out and find the one that hits the most boxes for you, or the ones that are willing to work with you to adapt to those needs that you have. So you know what you need at this stage in the process. So you should be able to pick the best one for yourselves. You're going to want to ensure that whoever you choose understands what your goals are. Hopefully, by the stage that you get to some sort of proposal, they're working with you on those goals to help you figure out what they should be, and then really supporting them throughout. So I would say the biggest thing is you need a sales enablement tool where they know that it's a long-term process, it's an ongoing maintenance of the system. It's not push to play or push to start, anything like that. It's a continuous project that will last for years. You're never finished with your sales enablement tool. It's something that's always growing and adapting. So making sure that your partner understands that and is there to help and support you as you go through that process, I think is so important. Because you know what you need to get done and they should be there to help you with every step of that process. And then getting the support of the end users. They're always going to be your greatest asset. They're the ones that are really driving the usage of the application, and they're the people that are using it on a day-to-day basis. Marketing might check in every other day or something like that, but your sales users are there from start to finish at the end of their days. So you want to make sure that they have everything that they need and that they're really involved in the process. So getting feedback directly from them. There should be somewhere within the application for them to actually submit that feedback to marketing or the sales enablement managers. And you want to make sure that all of their thoughts and ideas are heard throughout the whole process and as it continues to grow. So for instance, if there's something that's missing from the tool, the best companies will work with you to help fill those gaps and needs because it's meant to help you. It's not meant to hinder you in that process. It's meant to keep growing with you. You want someone that's always doing work and someone that's updating and improving as the times change. So like Dave mentioned with COVID, everything kind of changed. How we were selling in person, everything like that changed. So with it being all presenting online and everything like that, the best sales enablement tools will have different features that will really help with that sort of piece of the puzzle. as we change, because who knows what's going to happen next in our crazy world.
Yeah.
And then as well, creating that training strategy. So the sales enablement champion or the manager should always be in charge of this, and you should get direct support from your tool in terms of helping with that training. The sales enablement manager champion is probably new to the system. They probably only started the buying process a couple months ago, so they don't know the product as well as the actual people that work at the company do. So by helping with that training, you can really figure it out, because they are often simple from an end user perspective, but there's often a lot of different features and tools. And in terms of like the integrations, like we talked about with Outlook and Salesforce or your CRM or anything like that, getting training on how to best use those integrations and really get the most out of them, that's going to be vital, because you can always just use the basic versions. And I'm sure we've all done this. We've opened up a project and we've just used the very basic tools in front of you. Somebody tells you can do an Excel formula like this, and it just blows your mind. But it's because you never had to sit down with somebody from Microsoft to tell you how to do that. So you're going to want to make sure that training strategy is in place for any new users. And with sales enablement tools, you're probably going to be adding new users as you move through the project. So you want to make sure that it's just a continuous execution on that.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, after that happens, so this would be all of the implementation from a getting started standpoint, but going forward, what you're going to want to do as well, as we mentioned with the blueprint, is you're going to make sure you have check-in meetings with your sales enablement person to make sure that you're achieving to that blueprint. It's not, you don't want to just make that blueprint and then forget about it. You want to make sure that you're always striving to hit those goals and KPIs. And that's something where just having weekly check-ins or bi-weekly, anything like that, will just really help you make sure that you're on the right track.
Yeah, I think that's important. The communication in those meetings are imperative to pushing the project forward in the right way. So you get input from all teams who are a part of that project. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Becca.
One of the things I really think on that list is extremely important is the getting support of the end users, and even as it mentions there, pushing top down is very rarely a recipe for success. And Becca, you may even be able to speak to this better than I can because you work with this customer on a day-to-day basis. But I know we have one client that actually has put together a rep council, and that was actually one of the foundational elements of their strategy. Was the sales enablement leader wanted to have a group of end-user salespeople who could be her champions, her counsel. There was a two-way feedback loop set up, and I think that was very important to their success. And you may know more about that or want to shine some additional light on it, but I just felt like that was a really good best practice.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely is in terms of getting their input on it. As a manager, you might not actually be using the tool to send out content to people on a regular basis. You might just be setting it up and putting the content into there. So by getting their feedback of the people that are actually using it day in and day out is so vital, and making sure that they know, by making them a stakeholder and somebody that has an investment in the tool too, it really helps to drive that utilization and to really get the value out of the entire process, I think.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, I know as we're getting close to time here, I want to leave at least 5 minutes here for Q&A. But Becca, just in concluding, if there was one big important thing that you could leave people with to think about in terms of implementing, what would you say is the most important thing to keep in mind as you begin that process?
Yeah, I would say that it is a sizable amount of work to set up your sales enablement tool. We're not going to lie about that fact, but it is so worth the benefit as you continue to work through the process. You'll really see that in the feedback that you get from those end users once the process has been completed, or not completed, it's never completed, sorry, but as it's moved through the steps. You'll see that the continuous maintenance to build that library and to maintain it and to make sure that it's really achieving what it should be is just so valuable, because you'll see the benefits. And if you aren't, there's always room for changing and for improving. So you can do it yourselves. It's not difficult. It's just an investment of time and energy. That's it.
Great thought. Well, as we get ready to wrap up here, I'm going to hit just a really quick review. So we talked about the 5 big steps: building team, setting goals and requirements, how to define your KPIs, how to handle content, organization and creation, and then finally the implementation. So we're going to send out a copy of the PowerPoint in that email as well. So you'll have a variety of content. You'll have the blueprint, You'll have the user requirement spec. You'll also have this PowerPoint to reference, as well as the on-demand link. If anyone has any questions after the fact, again, please reach out. All three of us, I think, are active on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to reach us there or email, either way is fine. And one thing I included here just at the end as well is just some pitfalls to think about. And to try to keep people out of the weeds when you're getting sales enablement up and off the ground. These are some common things that we see that typically can get projects either off the rails or at least be road bumps. Number one is a lack of executive buy-in. So if this project doesn't have support from senior leadership, that's going to be a pretty hard uphill battle. So I would say if you are a sales enablement leader and pushing this inside of your organization, make sure you've got buy-in at the top. The second one is the easy route, which is saying, not doing. So, hey, we're going to come up with a plan and we're going to say we're going to execute it, but we're not going to follow the KPIs. We're not going to hold ourselves accountable. We're not going to create those interdepartment relationships. It's just easy to fall into that hole. So be careful for that. The third is throwing software at a problem. As much as we recommend, we think any company should be using sales enablement, but it's always important first to make sure you've got everything tight inside of the ship, right? Before you start throwing software at that. So I always say, before you just go buy a tool, make sure you have a defined process. Go through the blueprint, think about your goals, and start from there. Otherwise, you may be spending money on software that is just going to expand your problem versus solve it. Again, failing to establish accountability, that kind of ties right back in with number 2. Just make sure you're holding accountable to the metrics. And then 5, not putting in place a champion. I think that is one of the most important things that an organization can do. Doesn't have to be somebody's full-time role, but at least someone who can be a point person and help lead the charge. And finally, one thing we talk about all the time when you're thinking about sales enablement, that is typically a pretty big project to start inside of your organization. You are not going to solve it in a week, a month. It may take you 6 months to really scale your strategy, but it absolutely pays off. This is one of my favorite Chinese proverbs, and the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. But the second best time is right now. So when you're thinking about getting started with sales enablement, it's easy to get hung up on, hey, this is going to take time or this is going to be complicated, but there is no time like the present. And it's something that you can take one step at a time. So with that, I'm going to check real quick. If anyone has any final questions, if you want to either hit raise hand or throw something in the Q&A, we'll have a little break right here. Paul or Becca, did either of you have some closing thoughts or any questions you wanted to propose to the other?
Nothing we haven't mentioned already. Becca, I think, already mentioned it and took the words out of my mouth. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And it's worth it. It's entirely worth it. We have seen tremendous success with the teams who have implemented it. And if you were able to chug along and check the boxes off, you will be able to reap the benefits and the rewards of it.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, we are right at the end of the hour. I don't have any other questions in the Q&A. So with that, we want to thank everybody again for joining and hanging out with us for the past hour. Please get in touch with us if you have any additional questions, and we hope to see you back for one of our other events. So keep an eye out. We're going to have another webinar in 2 weeks, specifically around industrial manufacturing and how sales and marketing has fundamentally changed since COVID. That's going to be a great conversation. We have Joe Mills, who's a senior executive at Element 3, which is a very large marketing organization in the industrial segment, is going to join us for a fireside chat around how industrial has changed. So if you're interested in that, please keep an eye out, and we'll have many more webinars to follow. So thanks again for joining, and we hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.